Hey guys, Braden here, and it has been almost 5 years since the last time I made a YouTube video. Now, in that time, a lot has changed, both personally and otherwise. I'm not going to bore you guys with the details, but most importantly, I'm just glad to be back making something. Making something in general was kind of my struggle point in returning to this. I've done little bits of writing like on Letterboxd and some stuff that I never really put out there, but I really just didn't know what form this would take. I mulled over doing like a manga channel, a film-centric thing, and ultimately I decided to just upload on my old channel. So if you've been subscribed to me for like 10 plus years since I did Nintendo videos as like a little 12-year-old, what's up? Even though I'm still not really sure what form I want this channel to take, I decided to start back at it doing what I love best, and that is a ranked list. So today we're going to be talking about my 25 favorite albums of 2024. In 2024, I got back into music in a really big way. Not that I'm not constantly listening to something, but a lot of my favorite artists released really great introspective works, and I was also introduced to plenty of new faces, all of which I'm really excited about, and of course I'll be talking about in this video. Even if you're not the biggest music fan, like I know some of my friends who are going to be watching this aren't, I hope you'll check out at least something I'm talking about here today, or tell me something that you really like this year in the comment section. Also, I'm going to have some links down below for all the albums I'll be talking about today, as well as a playlist that kind of has some selections of my favorite songs from them. So with that being said, let's get straight into this. 25 Black Dresses, Laughing Fish. Although I've been a big fan of Black Dresses for several years now, until this point I feel like there hasn't been a single album of theirs that's been able to mix the poppier and noisier elements of their sound perfectly. Laughing Fish is pretty much their closest attempt at that. Thankfully, with Laughing Fish having the band's longest runtime to date, going a little over an hour, there's plenty of room for both, and they seamlessly weave together squelching synths, industrial guitar, and punishing glitchy percussion. There's this irresistible trashy 90s kind of like nu metal vibe to this that I cannot get enough of. Apparently this is going to be their last album, which I'm really sad to see them go, but this is a hell of a way to go out. 24. Dissimulator, Lower Form Resistance. Shout out to this album for getting me to listen to way more metal this year than I have in the past. I decided to randomly pop this on during a road trip, and man, am I glad I did. I think the general aesthetic of this album appeals to me a lot more than some of the other metal stuff out there. Don't get me wrong, I love my ghouls and blasphemy and religious imagery, but the Tetsuo the Iron Man inspired cover says it all. A record primarily about a post-humanity dystopian future infested by technology, AI, wires. More than anything, it's just a kind of cheesy thrash metal vibe with some hella good technical playing, and I really have not seen enough people talk about this one. 23. Beth Gibbons, Lives Outgrown. I will forever associate this album with my first listen I had of it on a chilly spring walk. I set out a little later than usual. I went down a route I wasn't really familiar with, and it was starting to turn dark. That combination of serenity and subtle anxiety was the perfect vibe to take this one in on. Gibbons' beautiful vocals provide warmth that's offset by the suspenseful strings and krautrock-inspired drumming. It kind of gives like a fairy tale vibe, but it's definitely more German fairy tale than Disney. Lives Outgrown is at once fearful of what's beyond and life-affirming for its appreciation of what's in front of us. Number 22, Ulcerate, Cutting the Throat of God. Man, that is a dramatic title. There is a sick profundity, though, to the religious nihilism of the New Zealand death metal Arbiter's 7th studio album. The lead singer's musings on the futility of life, faith, and hope are buried in the reverb-heavy mix, but the instrumentation just makes it sing in an elegiac way that only metal can. It's also exactly what I want out of tech death. Impossibly complex but effortlessly catchy riffs mixed with machine gun precise drumming. It's not really a vibe I find myself wanting to return to all that often, but when I do make the journey, it's a harrowing, cathartic, and pleasurable one. 21. MJ Linderman, Manning Fireworks. I guess it's no surprise since country music is on the rise pretty much everywhere that the indie circuit would want their own slice of the pie, or maybe it's just that MJ Linderman's breakthrough record is just that damn good. It's funny, catchy, and tongue-in-cheek in a knowingly pathetic way. It was the soundtrack for many commutes to me in my own humdrum Midwest life, in particular the first time I changed a flat tire. Side note, I wrote this, and then the very next day I got another flat tire. 20. Jessica Pratt, Here in the Pitch. An album that initially draws you in with its soft, twilight beauty, but makes you stay for coffee for opaque poetry and prosaic longing. There's this classic 70s singer-songwriter vibe to this one, especially in Pratt's cadence, but it's not nostalgia bait by any means. A comforting, reflective listen that I find myself drawn to more and more as it gets darker earlier and the weather gets frostier. 19. Crippling Alcoholism, With Love from a Padded Room. Ridiculously and tragically underrated. Think 90s Swans with vocals provided by a raging drunk. I'm kind of hit or miss on concept albums in general, but the idea of this one's really cool. It's essentially the perspective of a bunch of inmates at this one prison. For a pretty dour, emotionally nauseating listen, this thing's got a surprising amount of emotional range. Sure, it's comically dark and darkly comical, but I think that the humanity of prisoners is a valuable thing to shed light on these days. 18. JPEGMAFIA, I Lay Down My Life for You. As an artist who's made an entire career out of chewing up and spitting out genre like a tornado, it's pretty surprising that this is the first JPEGMAFIA with a major rock influence. Even more astonishing is that it makes up such a big chunk of this album's DNA without feeling like some kind of gimmick. Now, a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that JPEGMAFIA has such a venomous energy to his music as is, that the muscular riffs feel right at home. Especially on track Vulgar Display of Power, which sounds like an evil WWE theme, which is pretty fitting considering he's probably the biggest wrestling fan in rap. 17. Mk.gee, 2-star in the Dream Police. For a while now, people have said that J. Paul kind of set the blueprint for the future indie, what with his hypnagogic mix of genres and perfectly imperfect mixing. Although, until this point, I don't think anyone has better embodied that ethos than Mk.gee. Super bouncy, impassioned R&B and rock that's as evocative of the past as it is the distant future. It's as intimate as a whisper in your ear while keeping you at arm's length. Truly mystical stuff. 16. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, Challenger's original score. This works startlingly well from beginning to end, enough to make me listen to it at least a dozen plus times when it first came out, which is a really rare effect for a film score to have on me. Also, one of the rare film scores that defines the film as much as the visuals do. It's dance music that's every bit as propulsive, sweaty, and sexy as the film it's for, and I'm honestly surprised I didn't get a speeding ticket listening to this on my way to work so much. 15. Adrianne Lenker, Bright Future. There's always been a latent intimacy and sorrow to Lenker's music, especially her solo work, but here on Bright Future, the illustrations of grief are more cutting than ever. This is an album primarily about lost love, but it doesn't just pertain to romance, even if that is a core theme. It's about the transience of moving from place to place as a kid, losing your mother's love, and even losing the world as we know it. It is a heart-wrenching listen, but there is a hope that underpins all of it. Whether it be misguided hope that you'll reconnect with a lover you know you shouldn't, or the virality that comes from the hatred and confusion you may feel towards them. Hell, the title is Bright Future. It is a really dark listen, and when I'm in my feels I will turn to it, but often I find myself just coming back to this one to appreciate some really good songcraft. Mark this as another win in Lenker's book. 14. Mach-Hommy, Rich Ass Haitian. While this is probably his closest swipe at a blockbuster rap record, Mach-Hommy is as indignant and brash as ever. Don't conflate blockbuster with mainstream though, this just has slightly more conventional mixing and a few high profile features. Coincidentally, this is probably the tightest, catchiest set of tracks he's put out in a minute. If you've heard one Mach-Hommy record, you probably know what he's getting at here. Lo-fi, dusty, drumless beats, clever wordplay, and of course a healthy dose of self-righteousness. 13. Geordie Greep, The New Sound. The New Sound is filled with character studies of perverted, pathetic men with delusions of grandeur, and is filled with the kind of jazz and prog influences that make up a certain brand of music dorks' wet dreams. All of this should sound incredibly familiar and honestly enticing to you if you were at all a fan of Black Midi, the recently broke up band which Greep was a part of. I usually despise anything with theater kid energy, but there's such an earnest, demented bend to it here, and it's so in-your-face self-indulgent that I can't help but kind of admire it. Most potent, though, is 6-minute Latin rock Howler, which is surprisingly catchy, that being Holy Holy, which follows an arrogant scumbag making increasingly obscene requests of his date to stroke his ego, until you later realized it's a sex worker that he hired to say all these things to. 12. Vampire Weekend, Only God Was Above Us. High and Low is the story of Vampire Weekend. Preppy, but with populist appeal, disparate ideas and sounds, but delivered in a familiar verse, chorus, verse format, and their newest Only God Was Above Us is no different. It's elegantly, richly produced, but juxtaposed with dusty drum loops, distorted guitar, and fuzzy synths. Most importantly, it's an album largely concerned with gentrification and generational change, made by a band that not too long ago was accused of contributing to such things. Number 11, Cameron Winter, Heavy Metal. This record really managed to sneak its way towards the top of my list at the last minute. I have next to no familiarity with Geese, which is the rock band that Cameron Winter is the lead vocalist of, but I get the feeling that even if I did, I would still have no idea what I would have been getting myself into with this one. Although it is an off-kilter singer-songwriter record, kind of in the vein of like a Nick Cave or Tom Waits, it's Winter's soulful, craggy voice and impressionist pen that really set him apart. It's an album that features oddball lyrical passages like, "You were born to break my big hairy football arms. Like clean windows kill birds," and "You'd like to keep my salesman teeth, wouldn't you, baby? Well, I'm on a pirate's crazy-eyed quest." So many of these songs, at least as I interpret them, are about pretty common writing fare. Whether that be unexpected love, growing pains, etc. I mean, anyone can write stuff that sounds like nonsense essentially, but I think it truly is the mark of a great songwriter if it can mean something in this abstract fashion. 10. Kendrick Lamar, G&X. When all of Kendrick's past studio albums have been designed as these colossal blockbusters with huge expectations behind them, I found it to be a breath of fresh air when G&X surprise dropped earlier this year. It's equal parts thoughtful, considered experience, and playful romp. Between the diss tracks released earlier this summer and a couple collabs with Baby Keem, there's been a pretty clear interest in exploring new flows, and thankfully that continues through on G&X, whether it be the soulful, lovely duet on Luther, or the infectious hook and rapid-fire delivery of Squabble Up. It's also proliferated with underrated West Coast talent, of which I was most impressed by Dodie Six, who is rapping for his life on Hey Now. It's an album that easily slides from a moment of colorful, vivid storytelling to some fun, playful boasting. We already know Kendrick is one of the best to do it, so at this point, what could be more impressive than making it look easy? And that's pretty much exactly what G&X does. 9. Igloohost, Tidal Memory EXO. One of UK Electronica's most colorful world builders trade in his rainbow sprites for something that closer resembles the grungiest sepia-toned album cover, which is just awesome. Look at that. Despite the monochromatic tone this one's going for, it still manages to be incredibly vibrant. For one, this is probably the most upfront he's been lyrically yet. The album features this super pitch-shifted deep rapping with all kinds of rusty cyberpunk imagery described. Despite the aesthetic switch-up, the addictive, kinetic percussion and high BPMs are still intact and are arguably better than ever. Number 8, Shoo Shoo. 13-inch Frank Beltrame Italian Stiletto with Bison horn grips. While catchier than they've been in a few years now, Shoo Shoo are as freaked out and opaque as ever on the incredulously titled 13-inch Frank Beltrame Italian Stiletto with Bison horn grips. While there has long been an otherworldly bend to the band's work, this is probably the first of theirs I genuinely called psychedelic and even in some rare pockets dreamy. Like on lead single Common Loon, which is veering into shoegaze territory, albeit in its own shoo-shooified way. Full of blown out, dirty synths and Jamie Stewart's signature ghastly, strained vocals. There's also some twisted riffs here, which categorically leads me to probably say it's closest to psych rock, although it's kind of like psychedelic rock in the sense that we received at Alien Transmission, and it was actually just their covers of some King Gizzard records. Pointless genre boxing aside, I genuinely recommend it as a primer to the band, especially if you're more open to out there stuff and somehow haven't found your way across these guys yet. It'd probably be a great fit for the first or second tier of one of those like flow charts for getting into a band's discography. You know, the ones that kind of look like a Zodiac Killer cipher. I seriously love this band. I owe a great deal of my interest to experimental music to them, and it's honestly pretty touching seeing them still push the envelope 20 years in. 7. Still Houseplants. If I don't make it, I love you. Kind of keeping in line with experimental rock, the new LP by Still Houseplants is kind of unlike anything I've ever heard. It is rock music with uncommon time signatures, but there's a greater focus on texture and it's also led by a soul vocalist. Generally, all of this could lead you to kind of consider them like a post-rock band, but it's the way that these influences materialize and the jazz-like communication between the members playing that really sets them apart. David Kennedy's metronomically precise drumming is both at odds with and inseparable from Finlay Clarke's warm, whiny, twinkly guitar, and then right there in the middle, you have Jess Hickey Kallenbach's beautiful bluesy crooning expressing these sentiments of self-inferiority and self-examination. Often it sounds like each of the members is playing their own song until for a brief moment they'll be on the same page creating this lovely harmony before things are ripped right back to that previous state of dissonance. It's music that equally conveys the highs and lows of self-discovery. It's warm but fractured, confessional but obscured, lovely. 6. Tyler the Creator, CHROMAKOPIA. Even though I really do enjoy the conceptual nature of his recent albums, I think freeing himself from a sonic or thematic palette has allowed Tyler to create his most emotionally varied and mature work yet. There's just so much color to be had here, whether it be the soulful, touching ode to non-monogamy on Darling I, the disgusting sex rap of Sticky, or the Black Sabbath sampled riff on Noid. There's just a lot of variety to be had throughout the album. While his past work has been largely insular or even outwardly hostile to others, with CHROMAKOPIA we're really seeing Tyler widen his lens to capture the lives of past lovers, his parents, and more. In particular, Like Him is outright devastating to anyone who's had a rocky relationship with their dad or been let in on a life-changing family secret. Like I said before, I do think it's Tyler's most mature effort yet, and honestly, it just has been touching to grow up with him and his work for more than a decade now. 5. Mount Eerie, Night Palace. I had the pleasure of doing my first 2 listens of this monster of an album on a road trip to and from a friend's house this past fall, and it really framed my relationship with art and where I consume it at in a fascinating way. I felt like the life-affirming and introspective first half of the album connected with me more on my drive up there during the daytime, whereas the more harrowing back half of it, especially with that lengthy poem, really just sung to me in a different way on that dark drive back. In general, environment and the natural world especially have been a focal point of Elvrum's work through his career. On the second half of Night Palace, he expands that view to kind of go over the brutality and wrestle with his feelings about these horrible things that have happened in these beautiful landscapes he's wrote about for so long. It's a dense record that has as much textural as it does thematic variety. This, combined with the longer track list and shorter run times for tracks, makes The Glow 2 seem like an obvious comparison, but it really is fitting as this is also one of his best works. 4. Cindy Lee, Diamond Jubilee. Have you ever been caught in your feelings for an extended period of time, whether it be days, weeks, months, just thinking about the same person or thing you have no control of? That's kind of the overarching vibe of the 2-hour monolith that is the new Cindy Lee album. Although a great deal of the material here, lyrically speaking, is about longing, whether that be romantic or otherwise, I think there is a great deal you can glean from this record. Personally, what comes to mind for me is images of a lost, washed-up Hollywood starlet, and I think that's largely inspired by the stone, distorted take on pop and rock flavors from the mid-1900s. I've always had a soft spot for what some might classify as hypnagogic pop, but something about the uniquely queer angle that Cindy Lee comes at it from really speaks to me. Pat Flegel, the sole creative force of the band, is known for playing with gender a lot in their performance, whether that be dressing like a femme pop star on stage, or alternating between higher and lower pitch vocals, like on the especially potent and aching duet, All I Want Is You. It's a potent twist on a bygone era of music. A recontextualization of pop culture that's so centric to radical queer art. It feels haunted, but not superficially so. Like the ghost of a pop star here to mourn the love she didn't get to have. Also, in what seems to be a trend towards the top of this list, Diamond Jubilee toys with genre a lot across his 32 tracks, whether that be surfer jams or country-tinged rock. I think this long-form rambling track list really suits this project. It's a prismatic masterpiece, the kind of massive double album that makes more and more sense the more you get lost in the reeds. 3. Chat Pile, Cool World, the feel-bad record of my autumn. On their second full-length, Chat Pile cover global concern through their uniquely suburban lens. 90s tinge gothy pedals and corn-esque chord progressions abound, while vocalist Ray Gun Bush sways somewhere between guttural screams and solemn moans. While the band's catalog certainly isn't the epitome of rainbow and sunshine, this is definitely the darkest, most depressive thing they've got their hands on yet. There's a constant smell of diesel present and the feeling of crusted dirt and mud underfoot. Cool World is a cold, reverb-drenched blanket of despair detailing the history of stained souls and subjugation. It's an album that taps into manic, primal feelings, all while still being incredibly prescient. Incredibly my shit metal album of the decade as far as I'm concerned. 2. Blade, Cold Visions. As someone who got into Blade in 2018 around that WODG red light era, the day that this came out was like Christmas came early for me. Not only does this evoke the more tread-focused rap of that time, but it's clearly a return to the malaise and dread that marked that era. Somewhere between Victory Lap and Relapse, Cold Visions is Blade rapping his ass off, enlisting to help a lifelong friends, as well as damning the industry and culture he's surrounded himself with. Speaking on culture, this also marks the first time in 7 years that Blade and Filthy have worked together, and in that time, Filthy has had a really big hand in changing the rap landscape. Sculpting the sound of major label projects from King Carson, Playboi Carti, and even showing up on a Young Thug or Drake album, that rage sound that he's pioneered has taken up such a huge chunk of the mainstream rap pie. It's very interesting then to see Blade return to the sound after it's become so popularized and essentially just have way more character and energy than some of the biggest faces moving the genre today. Somehow, across 30 tracks, Blade doesn't lose momentum once. And now that I'm saying that, I'm really discovering that this sort of long track list was, I guess, just extremely my thing this year. 1. Charli XCX Brat. Alright, come on. If you knew me, you knew this would be at number 1. And let's be brutally honest, I'm far from the only person putting this at number 1, let alone the only gay guy, but for good reason. With how much Brat Summer has become this huge cultural monolith, it's been kind of easy to forget just why and how much I love this album in the first place. Beyond me obviously just being happy for Charli to get her flowers as a musician that I really cherish, I think this is just the perfect expression of her pop star ethos, as well as a really personal, candid record. It's the party, the after party, and after the party. It's wanting so badly to put yourself out there, yet at the same time hating that you're perceived. It's an introspection through pop escapism and honestly a breath of fresh air in the era of authenticity and intimacy in pop records. It's clearly an album by and for the early 30s crowd, but there's something about the combination of sincerity and irony, hedonism and melodrama that will appeal to anyone inundated in the internet age. Flowery language aside, it's also just filled with hits and hooks that dominated my year. Hell, 4 out of the 5 songs on my Spotify Wrapped were from this thing. I've had a little moment with just about every song here, whether that be the earth-shattering club music of B2B, the bouncy free-spiritedness of Apple, or the braggy strut pop of 360. Brat is an endlessly re-listenable and confident gesture of a pop record that also serves as a crystal clear distillation of one of my favorite artists' career. So for those reasons, it is very obviously my album of the year. Thanks for watching, friends. I appreciate you guys checking this out. Like I said, please bear with me as I change things around. I'll get better at editing, filming videos, hopefully, spruce up my recording set a bit. Hopefully this isn't the last of these. I actually kind of had a bit of fun making this, even if it came out a little bit later than I wanted it to. So yeah.